Hello and welcome to Media Watch on Hunger and Poverty. I'm your host, Bill Schickler, and today we want to cover a topic that hasn't been covered in the mainstream press at all. It's an ongoing conflict in Burma, currently called Myanmar, that's being run by a military junta. We at first want to warn our audiences that some of the pictures that we're going to have in our background here may not be suitable for young viewers. So please be advised that we have some very graphic photos on the situation in Burma. And to talk about this, we want to introduce from the U.S. Campaign for Burma, Michael Hawk. Michael, welcome to the program.
Thanks a lot, Bill. I'm glad to be here.
So, Michael, the U.S. Campaign for Burma, could you tell us a little bit about the organization?
Sure, yeah. So we're an advocacy organization that works to bring the voices of Burma's democracy movement to Washington. Our executive director is a gentleman by the name of Aung Din. He was involved in an uprising in Burma in 1988 that eventually led to an election where Aung San Suu Kyi, who's Burma's democracy hero, she won that election and was never allowed to take power. So a lot of people who were supporters of hers left Burma, and they tried to get different countries around the world to support her in her struggle for democracy and in the Burmese people's struggle for democracy. So he was one of these people who left Burma, and he came here to try and get the United States government to be on the side of Aung San Suu Kyi and the democracy movement in Burma. And so we have a very large grassroots following. We have a list of about 60,000 people, and we have people all over the country, and we have them call their senators and congressmen when things come up.
Okay, and I guess our audience want to know, well, what is the problem with Burma right now? And it involves genocide, is that correct?
Sure, well, there's two kind of main problems that people usually talk about when they talk about Burma. The first one being this election in 1990 that was never recognized. There was a movement for democracy there, and the party that won that election was never allowed to take power. The second one being a struggle for ethnic autonomy that's going on in the country as well. That has been cracked down upon over 60 years. It's the longest running civil war in the world. And the crackdown upon that ethnic struggle for autonomy has been absolutely brutal. 35,000 villages have been burnt down. 3,500 villages have been burnt down in eastern Burma alone since 1996. There's widespread instances of rape as part of this war. And so it's an extremely brutal crackdown on these ethnic groups that are fighting for their autonomy.
Now, we've gone in recent history with a lot of concern about using the term genocide.
Yeah.
We saw what happened in Rwanda. The president didn't want to use the term genocide because supposedly, if we use that term in U.S. law, there are certain actions we have to take to stop this genocide.
Right.
And in Darfur, Sudan, the Congress and the president called it genocide, but they didn't affect the law. So
right.
In any event, using the term genocide has not only a lot of implications as to what is going on, but it also could determine actions that the U.S. and other countries around the world could take. So if you could just sort of generally describe why people are talking about a genocide going on, and how did we determine that?
Yeah, well, actually, for what we're calling for, it doesn't have to be ruled a genocide. We're calling for the UN to do what's called a commission of inquiry into the crimes against humanity that are happening there. And we're not getting into the genocide question as an organization because there's enough in international law that says if there are mass atrocities taking place, which there most certainly are. It's been very well documented by the UN and by a very recent study by Harvard University, that there are definitely mass atrocities going on there, and that's enough for the international community to step in, for the International Criminal Court, for the responsibility to protect, to be something that is utilized. So we're actually, as an organization, we're pushing for this because we think that this is the better way to do it in the international community, to just talk about the crimes against humanity that are happening there. Genocide's very, very hard to prove. It's about intent, not results. So it's intent to destroy an entire ethnic group, which is something that's extremely hard to in whole or in part, right? But it's something that's extremely hard to prove.
So what is the ethnic group that is at risk here?
Well, the major one that people talk about a lot is the Karen ethnic group. They're a group of Christians that sided with the British during the decolonization struggle and World War II, and so have had like historic tensions with the majority government. But there's actually 8 major ethnic groups in Burma, and many of these ethnic groups have armies associated with them. And a lot of those armies are also fighting for autonomy. There's a number of groups associated with the Shan ethnic group, which is to the north, another ethnic group called the Rohingya ethnic group, the Mon ethnic group. There's quite a few.
And it's my understanding that it's kind of ironic that this Karen group is actually number-wise the majority ethnic group in numbers. I don't know about right now, but is that the case?
I actually don't believe that is the case. At least not right now. The Burman ethnic group is the majority in numbers. Yeah.
Okay. You're talking about the other major aspect of this is the violation of human rights and the fact that it's a military junta.
Right.
You talked about Aung San Suu Kyi.
Yep.
Our viewers may not know this person. She won the Nobel Peace Prize while under house arrest in Burma. And it was in 1990 that she won the election for presidency.
That's right. In 1990, she won.
The National League of
her party,
for
the
Democracy?
National League for Democracy, won that election. And she actually campaigned from prison. And the fact that she was able to campaign from prison and win an election, I think, speaks to her popularity. She's a uniter in the country. Like when she is not in prison, she goes out to the ethnic areas and will wear the different ethnic dress. And it makes the different ethnic groups like feel part of a more united Burma. I was recently out actually in Maryland. There's one of these ethnic groups. A lot of their members have been resettled here through refugee resettlement process called the Chin ethnic group. And I was at their Chin National Day, and they showed a big picture of Aung San Suu Kyi wearing their Chin national dress, and they all stood up and they cheered and they said, so she's like their person, she's she's the daughter of Aung San, who's like Burma's George Washington. He's like Burma's liberation hero. He's the one who fought the British. And so, she is somebody that can kind of unite everyone around that vision, around a vision of a united Burma, and it's something that the different ethnic groups feel comfortable with.
It was my understanding that after World War II, that for a while Burma was ruled by a parliamentary democracy until about 1962.
1962, yeah.
Then it started a series of military juntas that it persists to this day.
Correct.
Maybe we could just briefly touch on the fact that underpinning this military junta has been a situation of drug trafficking.
Yeah.
Even during the Vietnam conflict, they talked about the Golden Triangle, which was Laos, Vietnam, and Burma.
Yeah. And
somewhat Thailand as being involved in the heroin trade.
Right.
Could you talk about this in the present?
Yeah, so briefly just the history, I suppose. It started during the 1950s when a group called the Kuomintang, the Chinese nationalists, had fled to Burma and were doing kind of sabotage activities from Burma into China, trying to destabilize the Chinese government with the help of the CIA. And so this group needed money, and so one of the ways they started raising money was by selling opium. And that's sort of the origins of this drug trafficking. It increased during the Vietnam War, the American GIs there. And it continues to this day. To this day, it used to be that most of the heroin in the United States came from Burma. Now most of it comes from Afghanistan. Actually, very little comes from Burma, from what we understand. But it does continue. The particular ethnic army, the Wa State Army, is infamous for using this as a way to fundraise. They're actually recently been switching over into pirated CDs, so they've kind of found a more legitimate way. But the military has also been known to profit off this as well. And so sometimes there's discussion about the Western countries cooperating with the military government in order to do drug eradication, and then we always have to point out, no, actually we've documented plenty of times when the military is actually not they're complicit in this, and even at times benefiting from it.
Well, to go from the general to a little more specific way that the Burmese people were suffering,
Yeah.
we know some of the images that we're showing are very upsetting, but we're not showing them to just upset people. We want to realize that we're trying to do things to end this suffering.
Yeah.
I understand that you, as a result of being involved in this organization, have come into contact with the personal stories of the way people have suffered through this human rights dilemma. Maybe you could tell us a couple of...
Yeah, I mean, you hear a lot of stories of suffering, but along with those stories, you hear amazing kind of will against that suffering, to triumph, to continue on despite the suffering. I was recently in Mae Sot, Thailand, which is a town just across the border from Burma, where there's a lot of Burmese there. They call it Little Burma. There's so many Burmese. And I went to a trash dump, and in the trash dump, there was a group of people there who were literally, they lived in the trash dump and they recycled the trash. They made about $4 a week. And
a week.
Yeah. And so it's degrading work. If you're a Westerner and you walk in, you see this as kind of degrading. But I was talking to a monk about it who was there, and I said, why don't they just go to the refugee camp? And he said, well, they're very industrious, so they want to work. And so that's why they're here at this dump working, like that's part of the way they get their identity. So you hear a lot of these stories that are, like triumphant, like in the face of like extreme adversity. These people had fled Burma, they'd fled the violence there, but they're working to survive. Another woman who's very inspiring is she actually lives in New York now, but a woman named Myra, who's from this Karen ethnic group, whose family was all murdered by the regime very brutally. Her father had to watch her mother be raped by soldiers. It was absolutely brutal. But she's come here to the U.S. and now she's full-time, lobbying the UN to try and do something. And so you hear a lot of stories like that, and it's very inspiring actually to hear these stories of people, facing down adversity and resilient and making the best of it and learning how to make the best of it. So,
well, I know, looking at some of the pictures of people having their villages burnt down and having to go out in the woods and just survive, having to hide in trees from army troops.
Yeah.
No water, no. They can't grow food because they'll be tracked down. So they're just living off the land, I guess, off of just roots and vegetables that they find.
Yeah.
It's an extreme situation for evidently a lot of people.
Yeah, and it's harrowing. I mean, when the army comes and takes out your village, you have little choice but to become, internally displaced and to walk around the jungles, and there are landmines all over the place, and you hear a lot of stories about mine victims. I've met a lot of people in Thailand who had crossed over, because there are some decent clinics in Thailand that can take care of the mines victims. So you meet a lot of people there with one leg and prosthetics, and yeah, it's brutal.
I guess we should touch on just briefly the situation in Thailand.
Sure.
At this filming, there's a lot of chaos going on there.
Yeah.
Basically, poor versus rich.
Yes.
Do you have any sense of whether this is affecting the refugees that had been camped on the border, whether that has had any profound effect? Is it hard to say?
Not that I know of. I mean, this is taking place in the cities, far away from the refugees. The Thailand at the time of this uprising was beginning a crackdown on undocumented people who had crossed over the border. There's about 160,000 refugees living in refugee camps in Thailand, but there's about 2 million Burmese living in Thailand. A lot of them work in the garment industry. A lot of them work 2 million, yeah. So a lot of them work in the garment industry. A lot of them work in the sex industry. A lot of them work in kind of the domestic labor. And so a lot of those people are not documented. And so Thailand has been beginning a kind of crackdown process to push those undocumented workers back into Burma. It's been very slow. And a few months ago, I was hearing a lot about that, and I haven't been hearing a lot about it lately. So I'm not exactly sure if that has anything to do with like the changing of where the resources of the army has gone right now. I'm not exactly sure about that, but yeah.
Okay. Maybe we could talk briefly. There evidently within the Congress, the Women's Caucus evidently has a group that's devoted to covering Burma.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's in solidarity with Aung San Suu Kyi. She's, a very popular person in Congress. She's very inspirational to members of Congress. And so this group will do things like write letters to the United Nations on behalf of Aung San Suu Kyi. So,
okay.
Yeah.
What do you think the public should be doing in terms of improving the situation? Is there any kind of legislative initiative or pressure to contact the media? Is there a strategy that you guys have evolved?
Yeah, I think that, well, one, you would want to go to our website, uscampaignforburma.org, and sign up. Because we know when something's coming up in Congress, and we know when to tell you to call Congress and do something about it. So the major things are funding for the refugee camps on the Thai-Burma border. The U.S. government gives money to this. So we can tell you when to call and get that renewed or ramped up or whatever we need. We're also calling for a UN Security Council Commission of Inquiry into crimes against humanity that are happening there. The UK has already called for it. Australia has already called for it. A few other countries have already called for it. The United States has not. And we really need the power of the United States behind this initiative. So we're working on it right now. There will be a letter going through the Senate soon. So it'd be a great time to join, and when you get their email from me, you know when to call.
And just to remind our listeners, you can phone up the Capitol switchboard 202-224-3121 and just ask for your senator or representative. You don't even need to know their names. Just tell them which jurisdiction you're from, which county, which state, and they'll put you in contact with their offices. We know that Aung San Suu Kyi had run and won the election for president in 1990, is that correct?
That's right, yeah.
That was 20 years ago.
Right.
And so she has been under house arrest for 2 decades.
Yeah, on and off. She's been released for a bit of that, but yeah, for the 15 of those 20 years, she's been under house arrest.
And during that time, there have been at least 2 episodes of Burmese monks who have railed against the military and paid with their lives.
Yes.
Maybe you could briefly describe the most recent episode and what grew out of that.
Sure. It's remembered as the Saffron Revolution. It happened in 2007. And basically what happened was the regime raised fuel prices, and this made people very angry inside Burma. And it there was a lot of discontent kind of simmering below the surface in Burma. Something that always kind of blows my mind about Burma, and I think a lot of people find surprising, is there's just absolutely no consent of the governed there. There's very little. It's not like other kind of authoritarian regimes where there's some buy-in with the population for one reason or the other. Like in Burma, there's practically no buy-in from the population. And so, when something like this sparks some public discontent, it's popularly supported. And so the monks came out and marched, and people came out and marched with them. And it was an amazing moment, an amazing media moment. A lot of very brave people took video of this, and they snuck the video out to the borders. They snuck it out to the United States, and it was then rebroadcast back into Burma on things called the Democratic Voice of Burma, Voice of America, BBC. And a lot of people in Burma have satellite dishes, and they saw this monk uprising, and then they saw the military crack down on monks. And one of the ways that the military tries, not successfully, to get legitimacy is to claim that they're good Buddhists. And then having the military called out against this popular uprising of monks, and people seeing images of the monks being beaten by soldiers was absolutely transformative. And it also sparked a whole new generation of activists. There was a large generation of activists that was kind of around the Aung San Suu Kyi's age, who were involved in this uprising in 1988 that led to the election in 1990. And now there's this whole new group of young people who are inspired by these monks. And there's been a lot of stories in the New York Times about Burmese hip-hop becoming a big deal. When I was on the Thai-Burma border, I was meeting with a lot of hip-hop artists and graffiti artists and people kind of a new generation who are excited to get involved in activism. So it's really changed the political climate in that way.
Well, just in closing up here a little bit, when we consider trying to get the international community involved in this, some people say that Burma has been like North Korea, that no matter what you say or do, it seems like that nothing happens.
Yeah.
And one of the stumbling blocks they claim has been China.
Right.
But just very briefly, I understand that China has now pointed out that oil is not a big deal to them, and they might be able to come around and putting more pressure on Burma. Is that true?
Yeah, well, what's happening is the regime is increasingly cracking down on these ethnic groups that I was talking about. It wants all of these ethnic armies to incorporate into their army, and that's highly unrealistic. They gave them a deadline of that actually already passed, that they wanted them all to incorporate. And so these armies aren't going to do that. So the regime has a choice. It can crack down on them and start war, or it can just keep kind of negotiating and appeasing them. About 8 months ago, they cracked down on a very small group called the Kokang. There's maybe about 200 people under arms. They cracked down on that group, and in trying to take out that group, they forced 40,000 refugees over the border into China. And China is concerned about that. 40,000 people flowing over its border is not exactly what it wants. So it was the first time that China really criticized the regime publicly in a harsh way. And so we see this as a symbol of kind of China coming around.
Okay, very good. Well, Michael Huck from U.S. Campaign for Burma.
Thank you.
Thanks for being on the show. And we'll be doing another program giving a little more depth to the historical facts that brought Burma to this point, and a little bit more on what we can do to end the suffering of the people of Burma. I'm Bill Schickler with Media Watch on Hunger and Poverty. See you again real soon. Hello and welcome to Media Watch on Hunger and Poverty. I'm your host, Bill Schickler, and today we're going to talk about the historical roots of a situation that is very dire in the country of Burma, sometimes referred to as Myanmar, but in the past termed Burma. The reason that this is important to talk about is that there's a number of people that are dying as a result of human rights violations. It could be termed genocide in some circles, but it's very serious no matter how it's defined. At the outset of this program, we would like to warn parents that some of the pictures we will have behind us are very graphic and may not be suitable or are not suitable for young audiences. So we would like to warn our families viewing in advance of this. And here to talk to us about the situation in Burma from the U.S. Campaign for Burma is Michael Huck. Michael, welcome
Bill,
to the
thanks
program.
for having me.
Michael, maybe you could tell us a little bit about your organization, U.S. Campaign for Burma.
Absolutely, yeah. So we're a grassroots lobbying organization. What that means is we get people to call their members of Congress in support of things in Burma that we support, right? So the big thing we're calling for right now is for a commission of inquiry into the war crimes that are going on there. We want the U.S. to support a UN initiative to investigate the war crimes that are going on there and have some kind of recommendation from that investigation. We were founded by a man who was involved in the 1988 uprising in Burma, who fled the country after his party won the 1990 election but was never allowed to take power. He came here as a group of Burmese who went all over the world trying to get world governments on the side of the democracy movement in Burma. And so he basically provides the vision for our organization, and people like me provide the legwork by getting people like you to call Congress.
Okay, so we know that from our previous program that there is a large-scale human rights violations going on in Burma.
Yes.
And there's a lot of suffering, a lot of death. Perhaps just in a broad statement of the present situation, what is going on to, I believe, one of the largest groups there is the Karen, is that correct?
Yes. Yeah, so there's a number of different ethnic groups there who have their own sort of militaries. And these groups have been fighting for autonomy for, in the case of the Karen, for 60 years. It's the longest running civil war in the world.
60 years.
Yeah, since independence. And since 1976, the Karen and other ethnic groups there in Burma have agreed that they're not fighting for independence from the state of Burma, but for autonomy within the country. And they've been working together. They've agreed to work together with this democracy movement that is represented by Aung San Suu Kyi, the famous Nobel Prize laureate from Burma, who's currently under house arrest.
Okay, so to get a sense, a feel for just what is happening to people on the ground,
Yeah.
we know that the Burmese army has been hunting these people down.
Yeah.
And burning their villages.
Yeah, it's been an absolutely brutal campaign against them. Since 1996, 3,500 villages have been burnt down. There's been widespread documentation of rape happening with impunity.
That's like 3,500 towns in the U.S.
Right.
Burnt to the ground.
Just burnt to the ground, yeah. It's been an absolutely brutal campaign against these ethnic groups in an attempt to break their struggle for autonomy.
So these people have, once their villages are burnt down, they have no way of doing agriculture or any way to keep themselves alive unless it's hunting or gathering. Is that correct?
Yeah, and they become internally displaced, fleeing within the country, or they flee to one of the borders. Thailand currently has 2 million Burmese living in it.
2 million?
2 million, yeah.
That's like Iraq in terms of number of refugees, I think.
Yeah, yeah. 160,000 of those live in refugee camps, but the rest are undocumented workers.
And those
Some of them are documented, but a lot of them are undocumented. And they're working in, apparel factories. They're working in the sex industry. They're working as domestic labor.
And these are all refugee camps outside of Burma?
Yes. And then there are different internally displaced camps inside of Burma.